I never thought I'd be humiliated at a wedding I paid for, but there I was, standing at my own son's reception when my new daughter-in-law, Marissa, smiled at the crowd, held the microphone, and called me a fat pig. Everyone laughed. Even her father, Richard, joined in and said I should eat less and give more. Do you know what hurt the most? Not the words, not the laughter, but the fact that I had spent 15 years paying for everything for them: rent, medical bills, parties, vacations, over $250,000 gone. And in that moment, I realized I was never family. I was just their wallet. My name is Evelyn. I'm a mother, a giver, a woman who once believed love was something you could buy with sacrifice, until I learned how costly that belief could be. Before we continue, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you're hooked, and subscribe so you don't miss how this unfolds. I should have seen it coming. Truly, I should have. When my son, Daniel, first introduced me to Marissa, I remember the day so clearly. He was still in college then, full of excitement and full of hope. He walked into the house with this beautiful young woman by his side. She was polished, well-dressed, with perfect hair and a bright smile. At first glance, she seemed like someone out of a magazine. She shook my hand and called me Mrs. Carter with a kind of charm that made me feel, for a moment, like maybe Daniel had found someone wonderful. But as the day went on, I noticed something that stayed with me. Her eyes never really lit up when she looked at Daniel. Not the way you'd hope someone's eyes would light up when they were in love. But her eyes did light up when Daniel mentioned the new car he was saving for, or when I told her about the house, or when she noticed the pearl necklace I was wearing. It wasn't Daniel she seemed interested in, it was what surrounded him, the things, the security, the comfort. Still, I told myself not to judge too quickly. I thought, maybe I'm being overprotective. Maybe it's just young love and she'll grow into it. I wanted to believe in my son's happiness. I wanted to believe he had found someone to love him for him. So I pushed my doubts aside and welcomed her. Not long after that, the requests started. Small at first, harmless, or so I thought. They needed help with rent because their scholarships didn't cover everything. Of course, I said yes. They were so young, just starting out, and I wanted to support them. Then came medical bills when Marissa got sick one winter. Again, I reached for my checkbook without a second thought. And then there were parties, birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, each one a little bigger than the last. I would buy the cake, the decorations, sometimes even cover the whole cost when they said they couldn't manage it. I told myself I was investing in their memories, investing in their joy. It never happened all at once. That's how it works, I think. You don't realize how much you're giving away because it's little by little. $100 here, a few hundred there, then a few thousand. Before I knew it, I wasn't just helping, I was covering everything. I told myself I was building their future. I thought that's what mothers do. They sacrifice so their children can stand taller. I believed I was being the mother Daniel needed, and maybe even the family Marissa wanted. But over time, I noticed something changing. Gratitude became less and less. A quick thanks was replaced by silence, and silence was replaced by expectation. Soon it wasn't, "Could you help us?" It was, "You'll cover this, right?" The tone shifted from request to demand, and I barely noticed the moment it happened. And me? I kept saying yes, every time, because I told myself that's what love does. It doesn't count the cost. I remember one Christmas in particular, I had spent weeks planning gifts for them, trying to make sure everything under the tree was perfect. When Daniel opened his present, he smiled politely, but Marissa barely looked at hers. She wrinkled her nose and said, "Oh, thanks," in a flat voice. A few minutes later, she was already on her phone, shopping for something else she said she actually wanted. That moment stung. Not because of the money I spent, but because it felt like no matter what I gave, it was never enough. I could never meet her standard. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself, she's young. Maybe she just doesn't know how to show appreciation yet. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to face it. The years went by, and the amounts grew bigger. Rent turned into a down payment. Bills turned into vacations. Vacations turned into home renovations. Every time they wanted more, I found a way to give. I worked longer hours. I cut back on things I wanted. I told myself it was worth it because I was helping Daniel build a life. But looking back now, I see the truth. I wasn't part of their love story. I wasn't part of their partnership. I was just the silent sponsor standing in the shadows. And then came the wedding, the event that should have been the proudest, happiest moment of my life as a mother. I had poured myself into it, time, money, energy. I wanted it to be beautiful for them. I wanted Marissa to feel like the princess she always wanted to be. I covered the venue, the food, the flowers, even the dress. Tens of thousands of dollars. I didn't complain. I didn't keep score. But that night, when they mocked me in front of everyone, it was like the curtain finally dropped. I saw the truth so clearly it made my chest ache. When Marissa smiled, held that microphone, and called me a fat pig, when the laughter rang out and her father piled on with his own cruel remark, I felt something inside me shatter. It wasn't just embarrassment. It wasn't even anger. It was the sudden, sharp knowledge that I had never been family to them. Not really. I was just the wallet they carried around in their back pocket, the one who paid, the one who gave, the one who sacrificed. All those years, all those checks, all those sacrifices, they hadn't bought me love or respect. They had only bought me a seat at a table where I was never welcome. That night, standing under the wedding lights I had paid for, watching them laugh at me like I was a joke, I finally understood. I wasn't part of their love story. I was just financing it. 2 weeks after the wedding, when the sting of humiliation still sat heavy in my chest, the phone rang. I remember the time exactly, 2:14 in the afternoon. I had been sitting by the kitchen window with a cup of tea, staring out at the garden I had neglected for months while planning and paying for their big day. The roses were wilted, the weeds tall. It was like the garden had become a mirror of me, poured out, ignored, and forgotten. When I saw Marissa's name flash across the screen, I hesitated. My first thought was that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to apologize. Maybe the guilt had finally caught up with her. Maybe she realized how deeply her words had cut me that night when she called me a fat pig in front of the world. I answered, heart pounding with a strange mixture of hope and fear. "Evelyn," she said, her voice honey-sweet, like she was performing for an audience. "How are you, dear?" No apology, no acknowledgement, just sweetness laced with something I couldn't quite name. I forced a polite answer. "I'm fine, Marissa. How are you and Daniel settling in?" "Oh, wonderful," she chirped. "The wedding was perfect, wasn't it? Everyone loved it. And the pictures turned out amazing. You really made it all happen." I sat in silence for a beat, waiting for the part where she would add, "I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean to hurt you." But those words never came. Instead, her tone shifted, still sweet, but more direct, more expectant. "So listen, Daniel and I were talking, and we realized we really need something to make our start together unforgettable. We've been looking at honeymoon packages, Fiji, overwater villas, romantic dinners by the sea, the works." I felt my stomach tighten. I had already given so much, paid for their entire wedding, spent thousands upon thousands making sure everything was perfect. And now, a honeymoon? She kept talking, her voice rushing ahead like a train I couldn't stop. "We found the perfect package. It's only $50,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but for what you get, it's actually a steal. And we thought you'd want to help us start our marriage right. After all, you've been so generous. This is just the last thing we need." I nearly dropped the phone. $50,000 for a vacation for two people who had just mocked me at their wedding? I couldn't even find words for a moment. I stared at the wall across from me, at the family photo hanging there. Daniel as a little boy, holding an ice cream cone, smiling at me like he was my whole world. My throat closed up as I thought, does he see me like this too? Just a wallet with legs? Just someone to fund Marissa's dreams? I finally managed to speak, my voice shaky. Marissa, do you realize how much I've already given? Do you realize what you're asking? She laughed lightly, like I had said something silly. Oh, Evelyn, don't be dramatic. You know money isn't an issue for you. You'll make more. And this is for your son's happiness, for our happiness. Isn't that what you've always wanted? To see Daniel happy? Her words sliced through me. Yes, I wanted Daniel happy, always. But was his happiness tied to me emptying my bank account? Was that the only way they saw me? Someone to squeeze dry until there was nothing left? I felt a heaviness in my chest, but also, for the first time in years, a flicker of anger that wasn't smothered by guilt, a spark of strength I had buried long ago. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and then I said it, the words that had been waiting in my heart for far too long. No, Marissa. The silence on the line was sharp. She hadn't expected that. Not from me. Not from the woman who said yes to everything for years. I continued, my voice steadier now. I'm not giving you $50,000. In fact, I'm not giving you another dollar. The bank is closed, and so is my silence. Her sweet tone vanished in an instant, replaced with something colder, sharper. Excuse me? You heard me. For years, I've given and given. I've paid for everything. And in return, you humiliated me in front of my family, in front of your family, in front of strangers. You made me into a joke. And now you want me to fund your vacation? No. It ends here. There was a pause. Then her voice, dripping with venom. Wow. You really are selfish. No wonder Daniel needs me. You've always held money over his head. You think you're the reason he's happy? Please. You're just bitter, Evelyn. Old, bitter, and alone. Enjoy your sad little house while we build a real future. And with that, she hung up. I sat there in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear long after the call ended. My hands were trembling, but not from fear this time. From release. From the strange, unfamiliar feeling of finally saying no. I stared out at the garden again. The weeds were still there. The roses still wilted. But for the first time, I didn't just see decay. I saw possibility. I whispered to myself, the bank is closed. And the words felt powerful. They felt final. That's when I knew this wasn't just a refusal. This was the beginning of a war. Because people like Marissa don't stop when you close one door. They try to break it down. And I had just given her the fight she had been waiting for. But this time, I wasn't going to lose. That night after Marissa's phone call, I broke down. I cried harder than I had in years. The kind of crying that leaves your chest aching and your throat raw. It wasn't the money request that shattered me. Not really. It wasn't the $50,000 she thought I should hand over like it was pocket change. No, it was what the request meant. Every dollar I had given them, every sacrifice I had made, every late night at work, every vacation I skipped, every gift I wrapped, it all came from the same place inside me. It came from a woman desperate to be loved. A mother who thought if she gave enough, if she poured out enough, if she sacrificed enough, she would finally be seen, finally be valued, finally be wanted. But sitting there in my kitchen that night, tears sliding down my cheeks, I realized the truth. I had been begging for a love that never existed. I stumbled into my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed. The silence of the house wrapped around me. Too quiet, too empty. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of just how alone I was. I whispered into the stillness, why wasn't I enough without the money? Why couldn't they love me for me? But there was no answer, just the sound of my own sobs and the creak of the old walls. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me down into sleep, but even in dreams, I saw Marissa's smirk, heard the laughter from the wedding, felt the sting of her words. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and a heaviness pressing on my chest. I shuffled to the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and instead of avoiding the pain like I had done for years, I decided to face it head on. I walked to the desk in the corner of the living room. That desk had become a storage space for bills, letters, and files. I hadn't touched some of those papers in years, but that morning, I pulled everything out. Stacks of receipts, old checkbooks, bank statements. Years and years of records sitting there, waiting to tell the story I had been too afraid to hear. I spread them across the table, the floor, everywhere. Piles of papers surrounding me like walls I had built with my own hands. I picked up the first folder, rent payments. I had covered Daniel and Marissa's rent for years when they were just starting out, month after month. I added it up. $82,000. My breath caught. I pulled the next stack, medical bills, broken bones, illnesses, emergency room visits. Some were Daniel's, but most were Marissa's. $39,000. Then came the parties, the vacations, the special occasions, birthdays that cost more than some people spend in a year, vacations to the coast, plane tickets, hotel stays, even a trip to Europe they claimed was educational. Gifts for every holiday, every milestone. I wrote down number after number until the page blurred from my tears. Over $100,000 on parties, on possessions, on things that now meant nothing. I sat back, staring at the scribbled totals on the notepad in front of me. Rent was $82,000, medical $39,000, parties, vacations, possessions, more than $100,000. The grand total, over $250,000. $250,000 gone. My hands shook as I looked at that number. My whole body trembled. Do you know what kind of money that could have meant for me? I could have paid off my mortgage. I could have taken trips of my own. I could have saved for a comfortable retirement. I could have given myself peace. But I hadn't. I had handed it all away piece by piece, wrapped in bows of hope and tied with ribbons of desperation. And for what? Not love, not gratitude, not respect. Exploitation. That was the word that finally sank into my mind. I wasn't generous. I wasn't kind. I wasn't a saintly mother making noble sacrifices. I was exploited, used, taken advantage of. I remember gripping the edges of the desk, my nails digging into the wood. My heart was pounding, my breath coming fast. It felt like I was falling down a well, the truth hitting me over and over again as I dropped deeper. They never loved me. They loved what I gave them. That realization burned. It cut deeper than Marissa's insults, deeper than the humiliation at the wedding. Because insults sting, but betrayal rots you from the inside out. I thought back to every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I told myself it was just this once. Every time I put my own needs on the shelf because I believed theirs were more important. I built a tower of sacrifices, brick by brick. And then I stood there at the bottom, crushed under the weight of it all. For years, I had told myself I was strong, that I was giving, that I was loving. But that morning, with piles of papers surrounding me like tombstones, I saw the truth. I wasn't strong. I was scared. I wasn't giving. I was grasping. I wasn't loving. I was pleading. Every dollar I gave was me begging for something I was never going to get. I sat there for hours, going through every paper, every number, until the sunlight faded and the house grew dim. By the end, I was drained, hollow. But somewhere deep inside,
I also felt the faintest flicker of something new. Clarity. For the first time, I wasn't lying to myself. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't hiding behind excuses. I saw it all for what it was. And that clarity, as painful as it was, felt like the first step towards freedom. When I finally put down my pen, I whispered out loud, "No more." Those 2 words were small, but they were everything. Because once you name the truth, once you see the cage for what it is, you can't unsee it. I had been exploited, but I wouldn't be anymore. That was the night I stopped being their bank. That was the night I started being myself again.
The week after I added up all those receipts, I woke up one morning with a decision. I was tired of crying, tired of replaying Marissa's voice in my head, tired of sitting in the ruins of what I thought was love. I needed to do something. So I dressed carefully that morning, pressed slacks, a soft sweater, and shoes that made me feel steady. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left the house. My eyes were still swollen from nights of crying, but there was something new there, too. Determination. I drove downtown to a lawyer's office. I'd passed it many times before, but never had the courage to walk in. My heart was pounding as I stepped inside, the smell of polished wood and fresh coffee filling the air. Her name was Miss Patel, a woman in her 40s, sharp eyes behind gentle glasses, with a calmness that immediately made me feel like I wasn't crazy for being there. She sat across from me, folded her hands, and said, "Tell me your story, Evelyn." And I did. I told her about the years of giving, the rent, the bills, the parties, the vacations. I told her about the wedding. I told her about Marissa's insults, the $50,000 honeymoon demand, and how, for the first time, I had said no. When I finished, I felt small, almost embarrassed, like maybe I had wasted her time. But she leaned forward, looked me straight in the eye, and said words that cracked something open in me. "Evelyn, you're not selfish for protecting yourself. You're surviving." I swallowed hard. Surviving. That word echoed in my head. For so long I thought I was failing as a mother, as a woman, as a person. But surviving? That was different. That meant strength. That meant I was still here. Together we made changes. We rewrote my will, we created a trust, we secured my accounts. Miss Patel showed me where to put up walls, legal walls, financial walls, that no one could break through without my permission. For the first time in years, my money was mine. Not Daniel's, not Marissa's, mine. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter. The weight of years of guilt and obligation loosened its grip on my shoulders. But I didn't stop there. That afternoon, I pulled out my phone and blocked Marissa's number. My hand trembled when I pressed the button because part of me still feared the fallout. But when the screen flashed "Contact blocked," I exhaled like I hadn't breathed properly in years. Next, I changed the locks on my doors. For so long, Marissa had come and gone as she pleased. She'd stroll into my house, open my refrigerator, criticize my furniture, and treat my home like it was her territory. But not anymore. Not a single step without my permission. I remember standing in front of the new locks after the locksmith left, running my fingers over the shiny metal and whispering, "This house is mine again." And then, perhaps the most important step of all, I gave myself a gift. It had been 20 years since I bought something just for me. Not for Daniel, not for Marissa, not for family, not for anyone else. Just me. That Saturday, I walked into an art supply store. The smell of paint, the sight of colorful brushes, the rows of blank canvases, it all tugged at something deep in me. A memory. When I was a little girl, I loved to paint. I used to sit on the floor of my room with watercolors, splashing blues and reds across paper until my fingers were stained. I dreamed of being an artist. But life, as it often does, pulled me in other directions.
Marriage, work, motherhood, responsibility. I hadn't touched a brush in decades. So I bought one, then another, then a set. Paints, brushes, a blank canvas. My heart beat faster with every item I placed in the basket. Not with guilt, not with fear, with excitement. That night, I cleared the corner of my living room, set up a little easel, and laid out my supplies. I dipped a brush into paint, pressed it to the canvas, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt like a child again. Free, curious, alive. The painting wasn't good. In fact, it was messy, clumsy, with colors bleeding into each other, but it was mine, a gift to myself. And when I stepped back and looked at it, tears filled my eyes, not the tears of grief I had cried for weeks, but tears of release. I whispered, "This is for me." Every stroke of that brush was like a bandage on an old wound. Every splash of color was a reminder that my life wasn't over, that there was still beauty waiting for me if I had the courage to claim it. Over the next few weeks, I kept painting. Some nights I painted flowers, other nights I painted sunsets or storms, or just wild swirls of color that made no sense to anyone but me. And with every painting, I felt stronger. I felt more myself. Marissa had taken so much from me. Years of money, years of dignity, years of peace. But she would not take my future. That week I learned something powerful. Taking action isn't just about saying no to someone else. It's about saying yes to yourself. Yes to protection, yes to freedom, yes to joy. And for the first time in 20 years, I said yes to me.
I thought blocking Marissa's number and locking my doors would be enough. I thought maybe she'd just give up, move on, and leave me alone. But I was wrong. Marissa wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun was shining through my kitchen window, and I was cleaning my brushes after finishing another painting. The house was quiet, calm. For the first time in years, I felt at peace in my own space. Then there was a knock at the door. At first, I thought it might be the mailman or a neighbor dropping something off. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Marissa was standing there, her arms crossed, her lips curled in that smirk I had come to know too well. And beside her was a man I had only seen in passing, her father, Richard. A tall man, sharp suit, eyes like steel, and behind them stood a notary holding a folder of papers. Marissa didn't even say hello. She just stepped forward, trying to push her way in. I held my ground. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "We're here to help you, Evelyn, to make sure Daniel's future is secure." Richard spoke next, his voice heavy, practiced, the kind of voice that's used to closing deals. "These are standard documents you just need to sign, and everything will be managed properly. It's in everyone's best interest." I looked at the folder in the notary's hands. My hands trembled. "What kind of documents?" Marissa rolled her eyes like I was stupid. "Papers to give Daniel power over your finances. It's time you stop being so selfish. You're old. You don't need all this money. We do." My chest burned. Selfish. That word stung. After everything I had given, every sacrifice, every bill I had paid, they had the audacity to stand on my porch and call me selfish? "Marissa," I said slowly, my voice shaking, "I have given you everything, more than anyone should, and you think you can come here and demand more?" She sneered, her face twisting. "We deserve this. You're old and alone. What else are you going to do with it? Die with it in the bank?" Those words hit me like a slap. Old. Alone. She said them with such venom, as if my age and my solitude made me worthless. I could feel my blood rushing to my face, my knees weak under me, but then something inside me hardened. I lifted my chin, steadied my voice, and said, "Get off my porch." Richard raised his eyebrows, almost amused.
Evelyn, don't be difficult. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. You don't want to make this ugly. But I had had enough. My hand shook, but I found the strength to push the door forward. The only ugly thing here is what you're trying to do. Now leave. And with that, I slammed the door in their faces. I stood there, my back pressed against the wood, my chest heaving. My hands were trembling, but I felt stronger than I had in years. They could call me names, they could threaten me, but they would not take my home, they would not take my dignity. Or so I thought. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. The return address made my stomach twist. The county courthouse. Inside was a petition. Marissa and Richard had filed legal paperwork claiming I was incompetent to handle my own affairs. They wanted control of my assets. They wanted a judge to strip me of my independence, to declare that I couldn't think for myself. My hands shook as I read the words. Evelyn Thompson lacks the mental capacity to manage her financial affairs. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letters spread out in front of me, and for a long time I couldn't breathe. Incompetent. The word echoed in my head, each syllable heavier than the last. All my life, I had been competent. I had raised a child on my own after my husband died. I had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. I had paid every bill, handled every crisis, made every sacrifice. I had carried the weight of a family that never carried me back. And now they wanted to paint me as weak, as broken, as incapable. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I whispered to myself, how could they do this to me? But deep down, I knew the answer. Because they wanted what I had. Because money had become their god and I was standing in their way of worship. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me sit up. Every sound outside felt like a threat. I felt watched, hunted. The next morning, I called Ms. Patel. My voice was trembling as I explained what had happened. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said firmly, Evelyn, don't panic. This is what people do when they think they can bully their way into power. But you are not alone. We will fight this. Her words steadied me, but fear still lingered. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my life, my freedom, my very identity. Marissa and Richard had made their move. They had turned my refusal into a war. And I knew, deep down, the battle had only just begun. After I got that petition in the mail, I spent days walking around my house in a fog. I couldn't focus. I couldn't eat. Every time I tried to rest, the words replayed in my mind. Evelyn is incompetent. It was like a stain on my soul. I stopped answering calls. I pulled my curtains shut. I didn't want anyone to see me in that state. Weak, afraid, small. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, my neighbor Helen noticed me. She was in her garden, trimming roses, and she paused when she saw my face. "Honey, are you all right?" she asked gently. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to smile and pretend, but the truth broke through before I could stop it. My voice cracked as I whispered, "No, I'm not." Helen walked over, set down her gardening gloves, and looked me straight in the eye. She wasn't pushing, just waiting. Something in her gaze made me feel safe enough to spill everything. So I told her. I told her about Marissa, about Richard, about the wedding, about the endless years of giving, and now this petition in court. Her face didn't show shock, it showed recognition. She let out a long breath and said, "Oh, Evelyn, I've been there." Those words stopped me cold. Been there? Helen invited me inside her house, made us tea, and sat me down at her kitchen table. Then she told me her story. Her son, her only child, had drained her savings over a decade. Promises of payback never came true. He brought his girlfriend into her home, treated it like his own, and when Helen finally said no, he turned on her, called her ungrateful, accused her of abandoning him, and even tried to file for guardianship over her. As she spoke, I felt chills down my arms. It was like hearing my own story, only with different names. Tears filled my eyes. You mean it's not just me? Helen shook her head firmly. No, sweetheart, it's not you, it's them. It's a pattern, and people like us, we give because we love. But people like them, they take because they see that love as weakness. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. Helen didn't stop there. A few days later, she came by with her laptop. She said, "I want you to see something." She showed me an online group, hundreds of parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles sharing their stories of financial abuse by their own children or relatives. As I scrolled, my heart ached. Post after post, line after line, it was me. I paid for their college, their rent, their cars. Now they call me useless. I thought I was helping. I didn't know I was feeding a monster. They drained me dry, then tried to take my house. Every word was a mirror. Every story was a wound I recognized. And as I read, something shifted inside me. For weeks, I had been telling myself that maybe I was too soft, too naive, too foolish, that maybe this was my fault. But looking at those stories, I realized this wasn't weakness. This wasn't stupidity. This was a pattern. Exploiters always sense who will give. They see the ones who can't bear to watch their children suffer, who will empty their wallets and their souls just to keep someone else afloat. They take and they take until there's nothing left. And then, when you finally stand up, they call you selfish. They call you ungrateful. They call you old or crazy or incompetent. It wasn't about me failing. It was about them using. I typed out my story in the group that night. My hands shook as I wrote it all. The wedding insult, the $50,000 honeymoon demand, the petition against me. I pressed send and sat back, my heart racing.
Within minutes, replies poured in. "You are not alone. They did the same to me. Stay strong. Protect yourself. You deserve better." I sat there in front of my screen, tears streaming down my cheeks as the words washed over me. These were strangers. They didn't know my face. They didn't know my history, but they knew my pain, and they cared. Helen sat beside me, put her hand on mine, and whispered, "See? There's a whole army of us, and once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it." She was right. That night, I went to bed with something new in my heart. Not joy, not relief, but solidarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't incompetent. I wasn't alone. The next few weeks, I kept visiting that group, reading, sharing, learning. I discovered that some of these parents had rebuilt their lives. Some had fought in court and won. Some had lost everything, but still found peace afterward. And through their stories, I saw possibilities for myself that I hadn't dared to imagine. One woman, Linda, wrote, "They can take your money, but they can't take your worth. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Another man, George, shared, "I thought I was the only father this had happened to, but the truth is, when you love without boundaries, people who lack conscience will bleed you dry. Don't let them." Every message was like a lantern in the dark. Slowly, I began to stand taller. I spoke more firmly when I went to the grocery store, when I paid bills, when I answered the phone. Not because those strangers gave me permission, but because they gave me perspective. I wasn't weak. I wasn't foolish. I was targeted, and now I was awake. Helen became my anchor during that time. Some afternoons we would sit together, drinking tea, comparing notes from the group. Other times she would simply listen when the fear crept back in, reminding me gently, "You're stronger than you think." It's a strange thing, isn't it? The very people who should be your safety net can become the ones who cut the rope. But sometimes a stranger or a neighbor can become your lifeline. I used to think support meant money.
That's why I gave so much of it away. But now I understood. Real support is someone looking you in the eye and saying, I believe you. And once you hear those words, really hear them, the world doesn't feel so heavy anymore.
The envelope from the courthouse sat on my dining room table like a dark shadow. My hands shook every time I looked at it. This was real now. Not just arguments, not just insults, not just slammed doors. It was official. It was legal. The petition claimed I was unstable, reckless, paranoid, unfit to manage my own life. Marissa and Richard had written those words. My own daughter-in-law and her father, men and women of influence, had put my name on paper as if I were some fragile, confused woman who didn't know left from right. I wanted to scream, but instead, I prepared. For 3 nights, I hardly slept. I pulled out my receipts, my checks, my bank statements. Years of documents were stacked in messy piles across my dining room. At first, it overwhelmed me. The numbers, the papers, the reminders of how much I had given away. But slowly, I turned that chaos into order. I bought a large binder. I created tabs: rent, medical, vacations, parties, transfers, gifts, loans. Every section filled with proof. Proof that I had not been reckless. Proof that I had been methodical, generous, careful. Each paper I slid into a plastic sleeve was a memory. A check for Daniel's rent when he was just starting out. A hospital bill I had paid when Marissa sprained her ankle. Airline tickets for their vacations. Credit card charges for endless parties. With every sheet, my stomach turned. But at the same time, my spine straightened. Because this wasn't just evidence, this was my truth. When the investigators finally came, I was ready. 2 of them, a man and a woman, professional, polite, but firm. They introduced themselves, showed me badges, and explained they were here to assess my competency, to decide if the claims against me had merit. My chest tightened. I could feel sweat on my palms. For a moment, I thought I might faint, but then I looked at my binder, the neat tabs, the careful organization, my own handwriting on every note. I sat taller. The woman investigator asked first, "Mrs. Thompson, can you tell us about your current financial situation?" I nodded, opened the binder, and explained. My bank accounts, the balances, my investments, the trust Miss Patel had set up for me. I told them exactly how my bills were paid, when they were paid, and how I managed my monthly budget. They flipped through my binder as I spoke, and I saw their eyes widen at the organization. The man asked next, "Can you explain why your son and daughter-in-law claim you're unstable with money?" I took a deep breath. Because I stopped giving it to them. Their pens paused mid-scribble. I continued. For 15 years, I supported them. Rent, bills, vacations. I gave them over $250,000. But when I said no, when I finally protected myself, they decided to punish me. They call me paranoid because I locked my doors. They call me unstable because I set boundaries. But the truth is, they don't want a mother-in-law, they want a bank. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. I showed them the receipts. I explained each transfer, each payment. I told them about the wedding insult, about the $50,000 honeymoon demand, about the day they came to my door with papers and a notary. By the time I finished, my throat was dry and my hands were trembling. I had laid myself bare, all my mistakes, all my sacrifices, all my shame. The investigators asked me a series of tests. Standard, they said. Who was the president, what day of the week it was, to count backwards from 100 by sevens. I answered each one clearly. My mind was sharp, my memory intact. Finally, the woman closed the binder, looked at me for a long moment, and then smiled softly. "Mrs. Thompson, you are not incompetent. You are being targeted." Those words hit me harder than any insult ever had.
not because they hurt, but because they healed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I wasn't paranoid. I was being targeted. And someone outside my little world could see it. When they left, I sat in my living room staring at the closed door, tears running down my face. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tide turning. Marissa and Richard had tried to paint me as fragile, unstable, incapable. But in the eyes of those investigators, I was none of those things. I was competent, I was prepared, I was strong. That night, I slept without nightmares. My binder sat on the nightstand beside me like a shield, and I thought to myself, the truth is stronger than their lies. Of course, I knew this wasn't over. A petition doesn't vanish overnight. There would still be hearings, filings, maybe even a trial. But the ground beneath my feet no longer felt like quicksand. For the first time, I felt hope. And hope, I realized, is the one thing Marissa could never take from me.
The morning of the court hearing, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, but my heart was not. It beat hard in my chest, heavy and loud, as though it knew the importance of this day. For weeks, I had dreaded this moment. For weeks, I had imagined walking into that courtroom, facing Marissa, Richard, and their smirks. Facing Daniel, too, if he dared to come. For weeks, I had feared that no matter how much proof I carried, no matter how clearly I spoke, the lies might still win. But that morning, as I stood in front of the mirror, something changed. I put on my best navy dress, the one I always wore on important days. Not too flashy, not too plain, just strong. I brushed my hair back, pinned it neatly, and put on a small string of pearls my mother had once given me. I thought of her then, of how she raised me to be resilient, how she told me, never bow to anyone who treats you as less. I took a deep breath, picked up my binder full of documents, and whispered to my reflection, you are not a victim today. You are a witness. You are the truth. When I arrived at the courthouse with Miss Patel while lawyer, the weight of the building pressed down on me. Tall columns, heavy wooden doors, the smell of polished floors and paper. It felt ancient, unyielding, and yet I knew this was where the truth had to stand, even if my voice shook. Inside the courtroom, Marissa was already seated at the table across from us. She wore a perfectly tailored black dress and pearls larger than mine, as if mocking me. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled like she was attending a gala, not a hearing about my life. Richard sat beside her, his suit sharp, his jaw set like stone. He glanced at me with the cold confidence of a man who thought money and power always won. And then, my heart broke again, just a little, when I saw Daniel sitting behind them. My son, my boy. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. I sat down, my hands gripping the binder so tightly my knuckles whitened. Miss Patel whispered, steady. Just be steady. We have the truth. The judge entered, a woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, her black robe flowing as she sat at the bench. Her gaze was sharp, but calm, the kind of gaze that saw more than words could hide. The hearing began. Their lawyer went first, a tall man in an expensive suit, his voice smooth as silk, but cold as ice. He painted me as bitter, unstable, paranoid. He said I was hoarding money out of spite, refusing to help my son and his wife because I wanted control. He gestured toward Marissa, who sat with her head bowed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. This young woman, he said, has endured years of emotional abuse at the hands of her mother-in-law. Evelyn manipulated her with money, and when Marissa finally asked for fairness, she retaliated. This is not about love. This is about control. My stomach twisted as he spoke. To hear my love twisted into poison, my sacrifices recast as cruelty, it felt like someone taking a knife to my very soul. Then came the witnesses. Marissa took the stand first. Her voice trembled as she spoke, tears glistening in her eyes.
Evelyn never loved me. She only cared about appearances. She held money over us like a leash. Every dollar came with judgment. Every gift came with strings. I tried to please her, but nothing was ever enough. She was controlling, manipulative, and her voice broke. Abusive. She looked so small, so fragile, that for a moment, even I almost doubted myself. That was her power, her ability to perform, to twist, to paint herself as the victim. Richard followed. His testimony was harsher. He called me paranoid, said I had delusions of being exploited, that I was unstable, unable to handle my own finances, and that my stubbornness was destroying Daniel's future. He spoke with such authority, such confidence, as though he were already holding the keys to my home. And then, unbelievably, they brought in a bridesmaid from Daniel's wedding, a woman I had only met twice in my life. She claimed she remembered me shouting at Marissa on the wedding day, humiliating her. I wanted to stand up and shout lies, but Miss Patel touched my arm gently, reminding me to stay still. It felt like the world was crumbling around me, their lies piled high, one after another, painting me as some cruel villain. I saw Daniel's face in the back row, expressionless, avoiding my gaze, and my heart asked the same question it had asked 1,000 times. Does he believe them? Does he believe her over me? Then it was our turn. Miss Patel rose, her posture steady, her voice calm but piercing. She didn't waste time on emotion. She went straight to the heart of it. If Evelyn is abusive, why did you accept $250,000 from her over the past 15 years? She asked Marissa, holding up the binder. Marissa stammered. It wasn't like that. She offered. No, Miss Patel cut in, her voice sharp as glass. These were not offers. These were payments. Documented. Rent. Medical bills. Vacations. Cars. Parties. Did you refuse any of them? Marissa's face flushed. And if Evelyn was so unstable, why did you trust her with your housing, your medical care, your travel plans? Why did you allow her to pay for your life for over a decade? The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of the judge's pen.
Richard tried to jump in, insisting it was family support, but Ms. Patel turned to him like a hawk. Mr. Lewis, let me ask you directly. Who benefits if Evelyn is declared incompetent? He froze. Would it not be your daughter and son-in-law? She pressed. Would they not gain direct control of her accounts, her estate, her assets? Richard shifted in his seat, his confidence cracking. That's not the point. It is exactly the point, Ms. Patel snapped. And then, slowly, Marissa began to unravel. Under pressure, her tears dried up. Her voice shook, not from sorrow, but from frustration. She admitted that, yes, maybe she exaggerated some claims. Yes, maybe Evelyn wasn't abusive in the way she had described. Yes, maybe the petition was Richard's idea more than hers. The cracks were visible to everyone. Finally, it was my turn. The bailiff swore me in and I walked to the stand. My legs trembled, but my back was straight. I looked at the judge, not at Marissa, not at Richard, not even at Daniel. I told the truth. I told the court how I had given because I believed that's what love meant, that sacrifice was the same as devotion, that paying their bills, funding their lives, was my way of holding my family together. But I also told them about the insult at the wedding, about the $50,000 honeymoon demand, about the day they came to my home with a notary, trying to force my hand. My voice grew stronger as I spoke. I wasn't just telling a story anymore. I was reclaiming it. I gave because I thought love meant sacrifice. But love without respect is not love. It is exploitation. And I will not be exploited anymore. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge paused, her pen resting against her paper, her eyes fixed on me. For the first time in years, I felt my voice reach farther than my fear. When I stepped down, I saw Marissa's face, pale, angry, exposed. Richard's jaw was tight, his hands clenched. And Daniel, he finally looked at me. For the first time that day, his eyes met mine, and though I couldn't read what was in them, I saw something crack. The judge cleared her throat and spoke. Her words were measured, precise, but they carried the weight of justice. This court finds no evidence of incompetence. The petition is dismissed. Just like that. The lies collapsed. The case was over. I sat back down, my body shaking with relief. I had won. Not just in court, but in truth. My name, my dignity, my strength, they were mine again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. When the gavel struck and the judge dismissed the case, it was as though a heavy chain had been lifted from around my chest. The courtroom noise blurred around me, papers shuffling, shoes echoing, whispers rising. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady for the first time in months. Marissa's face burned red as she grabbed her handbag and stormed out of the room. She didn't even glance back at me. Richard muttered something under his breath, sharp, venomous words I didn't bother catching, before following her. Their footsteps faded, their power dissolved. And Daniel, my son, he sat frozen for a long moment, his hands clasped, his head bowed. When he finally rose, he didn't look at me. He walked out quietly, his shoulders hunched as though he carried a weight he couldn't admit was his own. Watching him leave without a word was the sharpest pain of the day. Sharper than Marissa's accusations, sharper than Richard's insults, because for years, everything I had done, all the giving, all the sacrificing, was for him. And now, in the moment of truth, he chose silence. But even in that ache, I felt something shift. I realized I hadn't lost a son in that courtroom. I had simply seen the truth of who he was. And truth, even when painful, is freedom. That night, when I got home, Helen was waiting for me. She had baked a small apple pie, her way of celebrating victories. I uncorked a bottle of wine I'd been saving for someday, and we sat at my kitchen table, two women who had both walked through storms. We laughed, we cried, we let the bitterness spill out, and then we replaced it with something lighter. Gratitude. I realized then I hadn't lost a family. I had freed myself from people who never treated me like one. In the weeks that followed, I began to live differently, slowly but surely. The first change was silence. My phone no longer buzzed with Marissa's demands, Richard's threats, or Daniel's pleas. The quiet was strange at first. I would wake up in the morning expecting a message, a guilt-laced request, a crisis that required my money. But there was nothing, only stillness. And in that stillness, I found peace. I began taking walks by the lake near my house. At first they were short, just a few minutes to stretch my legs, but soon they became long and wandering, an hour at a time. I watched ducks glide across the water, leaves shift with the wind, children laugh on the shore. The world seemed brighter, softer, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it again. I enrolled in that art class I had promised myself. Sitting in front of a blank canvas, brush in hand, I felt like a child again. The colors were mine to choose, the strokes were mine to make. For once, I wasn't painting to please anyone. I was painting for me. And each canvas became proof that I could still create beauty after years of being drained. Helen and I grew closer. Some evenings we shared dinner, trading stories of our younger years, our hopes, even our regrets. Other evenings we sat in quiet companionship, simply enjoying the comfort of not being alone. She reminded me that friendship can sometimes be stronger than blood. Months passed. Life softened. Then one day I heard the news. Richard's company had collapsed.
bought out by another firm led by none other than a wealthy businessman who had been seated at my table during Daniel's wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me. Poetic justice, I thought. The very night they humiliated me, mocked me, used me, someone else had been watching, someone who would eventually strip Richard of the empire he had used as a weapon against me. I didn't rejoice in his downfall, but I won't lie, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because he failed, but because the world showed me that greed doesn't always win. And Marissa, from what I gathered through whispers in town, her lavish life had dulled. No more lavish trips, no more designer gowns. She still had Daniel, but I wondered if love born out of money could survive without it. As for Daniel, he never came back. No apology, no visit, no letter. At first, the silence tore at me. I waited, hoping each day would bring some sign that he remembered me, not as a wallet, but as his mother. But as time passed, I learned to stop waiting. Love cannot live where respect does not exist. And though he was my son, he had chosen his side. That was his journey, not mine. One evening, I sat in my garden with a fresh canvas on my easel, the sky painted in pink and gold as the sun dipped. I dipped my brush in paint, and suddenly I understood something simple but powerful. For years, I believed my worth was measured by what I gave, that my love had to be proven through sacrifice. But love, real love, isn't about what you lose. It's about what you share freely, with joy, with respect. And exploitation? Exploitation is the shadow that pretends to be love. I had lived in that shadow for too long. Now, I live in the light. My money is mine. My peace is priceless. My days are filled with art, walks by the lake, and laughter with Helen. And for the first time in decades, I feel whole. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Daniel will one day return, humbled and regretful. Maybe Marissa will fade from his life, or maybe not. Maybe Richard will rebuild. Maybe he won't. But I do know this. Whatever comes, I am no longer afraid. Because I survived. I fought. I won. And now, I live.
1 year later, I sit by the same lake I used to walk past when I felt empty, and I hardly recognize the woman I was. The woman who cried over piles of receipts, who begged for scraps of affection, and who thought giving away pieces of herself was the only way to earn love. That woman was tired, broken, and afraid. I am not her anymore. I am stronger now. Not because life magically became easy, but because I finally learned that boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are doors that let the right people in. Boundaries saved me. Respect saved me. When I look back, I see the mistakes I made. I see the years of sacrifice that went unthanked, the blind hope that money could buy closeness, the silence I kept while I was being drained. But I don't see failure anymore. I see lessons. Hard, costly lessons. And if there is one truth I carry with me, it is this. Love without respect is not love at all. It is exploitation dressed in sweet words and false promises. My name is Evelyn. I'm 62 years old. I have paint under my fingernails, laughter in my kitchen, and peace in my heart. And I have learned something I wish I had known years ago. It is never too late to close the bank and open the door to your own freedom. So if you've ever been used by the very people who called themselves family, I want you to hear me. You are not alone. You do not have to keep giving until there's nothing left. Your worth is not measured by what you give away. It's measured by how deeply you honor yourself. And that, my friends, is priceless.